Hello everyone. In this video I will be ranking all swords from worst to best. Take note that this video was made during update 4.5. Let's get right into the video. The worst sword in the game is the Katana, since it doesn't have any skills, and is only used for sword styles, so it's basically useless if you aren't using 1 or 2 SS. Never mind, it's not useless, but it's just not good compared to other weapons. Next is the Festival Shield. This weapon is really bad. It has a short range and slow M1 speed. It has a good counter move though, but overall this shield is just bad. Next is the bells. All you can do with this weapon is just heal yourself and your friends. The range and damage of this weapon is really bad. The heal move can be really useful though. The heal skill is useful though, but overall the weapon is not good. Next is Golden Hook. This weapon is fun to use. The range and damage is bad, but the M1 speed is fast. The moves are solid. Overall a decent weapon. Next sword is the Hollow's Fang. This sword and the moves are really good, especially Shadow's Mark. This weapon also has the fastest M1 speed in the game, but the range is bad, and I think other weapons are better. Overall another decent weapon. Next weapon is Flowers. This weapon is good for PvP cause you can combo extend, and it has a stamina regen move. The range and damage is kinda bad though. This weapon is carried by Flower Charm cause it's really good for PvP and team fights. Overall good for PvP, bad for PvE. Next we have Crab Cutlass. This was the best weapon back then, but it got a big nerf. The sword has a good range and speed. You can also combo extend, but the damage is bad. It's good for PvP, but bad for PvE. Overall it's still a decent weapon after the nerf. Next weapon is Pole. This weapon is really good for PvE, or farming bosses and NPC. It's bad for PvP if you are not Mink, but if you are Mink then it's decent, because it stuns the enemy for a split second whenever you hit an M1. The problem is all of the moves are hard to hit, and they have high cooldowns. Overall a good sword, good for PvE, but kinda bad for PvP. Next is Basento. This weapon is really fun to use. It has decent speed, really good damage and range, however the moves have high cooldown and hard to hit on players. Overall it's good for both PvP and PvE. Next is Gravity Blade. This sword is definitely the best for PvE. I think you can solo dungeons with it, but for PvP it's decent cause the moves are hard to land. The sword still has good damage, range and speed. Overall a good sword especially for PvE. Next is Festival Lancer. This weapon is really good for PvP, since it can combo extend, and has a decent counter wall. This sword has really good damage, range and decent speed. Overall a solid sword good for both PvE and PvP. Next is Kiribati. This weapon is really good and fun to use. It has really good damage and range, decent M1 speed, good for both PvP and PvE, because the moves are solid. Overall really good and underrated weapon. Next sword is Candy Cane. This sword is one of the best for PvP, because of its good damage, and really good range and M1 speed. It has a decent healing skill and AoE skill. Overall insanely good for PvP and decent for PvE. Next is Demon Jester Scithe. This weapon is still really good after the nerf, but it's not as OP as the old one. It's good for PvP, really good for PvE. The moves have hyper armor, and do good damage. The M1 speed and damage is good. The range is decent. Overall one of the best swords. Top 3 sword is Trident. This sword is very similar to Candy Cane. It has a really good speed and range and good damage. The moveset is solid, especially Impale. Overall really good for PvP and good for PvE. Top 2 sword is Yellowhammer. This sword is probably the best for PvP. It has an insane amount of damage, really good range, but probably the slowest sword, and it's also good for PvE. Overall a really good sword, and broken for PvP. Watch this clip of me bullying my opponent. The best sword in the game currently is Kraken Blade. This sword is top 2 when it comes to PvE, and it's really good for PvP. The sword has an insane damage and range, decent M1 speed, and a solid moveset. Overall this sword is just really good for everything.